Thank you so much. And it's a great privilege and a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about my work and also about my passion. I was going to put my hand behind my back so that you didn't know I was over 25, but I thought you'd recognise that I had a watch on anyway, and it does have two functions. I actually took this photograph a couple of years ago, and I took it because it illustrated everything that I see in a slum area. This is in Hyderabad in Andhra Pradesh. It's got vibrancy, competition, markets, entrepreneurship. People aren't standing around waiting for international aid agencies to do something for them. They're not standing around waiting for governments to do something because they're not going to do anything. So this is everything that is good in slum areas around the world. But what was really interesting is when I got the photograph home, in the top left-hand corner, you can see there's an advertisement. And it's an advertisement for a low-cost private school, a fee-paying school there in the slums of Hyderabad called Galaxy School. It's an English medium school. And wherever you go in developing countries, you'll see these adverts. Today I'm going to talk to you about research that I've done at Newcastle University with the E.G. West Centre. And it was funded by the Sir John Templeton Foundation. And we went into the slums of Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, India and China in search of schools. What we wanted to do was challenge the accepted wisdom. And the accepted wisdom is that private schools are for the elite, they're for the rich. Everyone else in slum areas and around the world need free government schools. We wanted to look at that accepted wisdom. We also wanted to look at the accepted wisdom that if private schools for the poor do exist, then they must be of low quality, lower quality than the free government schools. So our focus was low-cost private schools which charge between £2, £3, £4 per month. And we're talking about fee-paying schools, so it's parents who are paying those fees. We were going to look for them. Did they exist? And if they did, what did they look like? So the first thing that we had to do was draw maps of the slum areas because we wanted to carry out a survey and a census of each of the areas that we were going to within these countries. And once we'd drawn the maps, we wandered down every street, around every alleyway, around every corner. And every time we got to a school, we plotted it on the map. And once we'd found a school, we carried out an interview and also an observation within that school. So what did we find? Well, for example, in Hyderabad, one of the areas that we studied, we looked at 3 zones in Hyderabad, the 3 notified slum area zones, Charminar, Banglaguda, Badapura. It's home to some 800,000 people in about 19 square miles there. So we looked at the 19 square miles. We found 918 schools in all. But what was the amazing thing was that 60% of these schools are private. These are budget private schools where parents are paying fees for their children to attend a school. And as you can see from this table, there is something called private unrecognised schools. Now, unrecognised schools are operating in the extra-legal sector. They don't appear on anybody else's radar. They're not on anybody else's list. And you can see that there in Hyderabad, in those 3 zones, there are more private unrecognised schools than government schools, which is a great news story, and I'll tell you why in a bit. Also in Delhi, we looked at Shahadra, which is in East Delhi, and it's about 20 square kilometres that we drew the maps and we wandered around the slum areas, and we found 265 schools, 65% of which are private, and again, there are just as many private unrecognised schools as government schools. So you might be there thinking, well, these schools must be quite small schools, run in somebody's home. Well, actually, no. In Hyderabad, the private schools go from nursery all the way through to class 10. So they're from 5-year-olds to 15, 16-year-olds. So they're very large schools. There's about 250,000 children going to those 918 schools that we found. 65% of the children are going to low-cost private schools. Similar findings in Africa. In Ghana, we went to the peri-urban areas called Gar, which is around Accra. 779 schools we found there, 75% of which were private. And we're talking about 70% of parents and people living in that zone are living below or on the poverty line. Similar thing in Lagos State, in Nigeria, in Lagos. We looked at 3 districts of Lagos State, Surulere, Kosofe and Badagry, and we wandered around those areas, and again we found 540 schools, of which 66 were private. In Africa, we asked the school managers, who manages your school? Is it a charity? Is it a religious organisation? Who manages your school? 80 to 90% of them said they were individual proprietor schools. They're not run by charities, and they're not run typically by religious groups. Again, Ghana, 65% of the children are going to private schools, and in Lagos State, around 75% of the children are going to private schools. This is a great news story. Private education forms the major provision for poor families in developing countries. And why is it such a good news story? Well, because we've got the unrecognised schools. We've got these unregistered schools that are on no official list. That means that education for all is going to be much easier to achieve, because it looks like currently these children are out of school when in fact they are going to these low-cost, unregistered schools. So it's a great news story, but not according to some. If we look at UNESCO, the Education for All Global Monitoring Report of 2009, although they recognise that private schools exist, they believe there is little cause for optimism. They think that parents in slum areas should send their children to free government schools, and that even though low-fee private schools are a symptom of failure in public provision, they are not a solution to the problem. They think that aid agencies and government should be putting their money into fixing the government schools. You have to ask, what happens if these schools cannot be fixed? Why can private schools for the poor not be part of the solution? Well, there are also other people, such as this lady here, who is an education advisor and administrator in Lagos State, there in Nigeria. And in fact, these are her opinions about the quality of low-cost private schools, even though she'd actually never been to a low-cost private school before she appeared on a programme that we made for Newsnight, for BBC Two Newsnight. She says that parents who send their children to private schools are ignoramuses. She says they are ignoramuses because they do not know that there is a free government alternative. She also said that private schools are the good, the bad, and the very ugly. She believes, even though she hadn't been to one, that ill-equipped, unapprovable private schools are causing a lot of damage. There are generations wasted, and she said the children come out half-baked. So what research is she actually basing her claims on? Well, it's really her own philosophical baggage. What we wanted to do with the John Templeton Foundation research from Newcastle there is look at the quality of government schools and private schools operating there in slum areas. First of all, we talked to parents. Then we looked at the survey of inputs and facilities in government and private schools in slum areas. And then we also did a survey of achievements with all of the pupils in government and private schools so that we could compare the levels of learning in those different schools. So what did we find? Well, for example, when we asked the parents what they felt about the quality of the schools in the slum areas, they said that the private schools outperformed the government schools. And why did they think that? They thought that if they pay a fee, that makes the school accountable to them. It means that if they pay a fee, if it's £2, £3, £4 a month, they can go to the school owner and they can complain. The teacher has to provide a certain quality because they are paying for a service. They are paying for their children to be educated. So according to parents, low-cost private schools are much better quality than government schools. And in fact, we looked at Kenya. We went to Kibera in 2003 when free primary education had just been introduced. One parent who had had his child in a private school, paying initially, took his child away to a free government school, found that the child wasn't learning, took them back to a low-cost private school there in Kibera, likened being able to pay to a marketplace. He said that if you were offered free fruit and vegetables at the market, you know they will be rotten. If you want fresh produce, then you have to pay for it. Oops. Also with the facilities, if your child goes to a low-cost private school, the class sizes are much smaller, half the size of government school classes. Teachers are much more likely to be teaching in a low-cost private school than in a government school. Typically, in a government school, teachers don't turn up. They've been found to be eating peanuts, reading a book when they should be teaching, drunk outside the classroom, or even sleeping, and you'll see that in the Newsnight video. And it's not just our research that's found that as well. Other research has found that this is endemic within the government schools. So if you send your child to a low-cost private school, they're much more likely to be educated. They're much more likely to have a school with drinking water, with electricity, with teachers who are teaching, and also with blackboards and tables. So the facilities in budget private schools are better than in government schools. We also tested 24,000 children around the world, and we tested them in maths, English, mother tongue, and other subjects. And we tested 24,000 children in private schools and in government schools. And we found that the private school children outperformed the government school children. They outperformed them in every single subject. Not only did we look at the raw scores, but we used different statistical techniques to analyse the data, and other people have also analysed our data. We've used multi-level modelling, we've used the Heckman-Lee two-step procedure, we've controlled for family background, IQ and school choice. And still, children in private schools outperform those in government schools, and this is at a fraction of the teacher cost. Teachers in private schools get paid about a third or a quarter of the pay of government school teachers. But remember, we're talking about low-cost private schools. These cost about 6% of an auto rickshaw driver's wages. So 6% of your wages to send one child to a private school. So the poor can afford these affordable, low-cost private schools. But this is a great success story. So what we found in our research, and what we're still finding today, is that the majority of poor parents sending their children to private schools in slum areas, and that these private schools are outperforming the government ones at a fraction of the teacher cost. So a great news story that should be heralded from every mountain, and everybody should spread this fantastic news. Great news story that's coming out of these slum areas. But how can we help these low-cost private schools? Is there anything that we can do to help them? Well, some would say just let the market carry on. They've been doing a great job without anybody so far. But what we could do is offer vouchers, so targeted vouchers to those parents who are poorer, who have not got the choice at the moment, who can't send their children to a low-cost private school because they're very poor. Or we could help them with investments. We're going to be talking about microfinance later on, but we can offer them investments so that they can improve the quality of the schools, because a lot of the schools aren't allowed to show that they make a surplus. Therefore, it's very difficult for them to access loans, and they haven't got property rights either. So investments and loans and innovative pedagogy is also a really good way forward. I'm working with a charity called Absolute Return for Kids, which is a London-based charity called ARC. And we're actually providing vouchers to about 900 students there in Delhi and Shahadra. And the vouchers are worth about £100 per year. For 5 years, these children are going to be getting a voucher. And the voucher covers lessons, it covers uniform, books, and also meals. And we're doing a randomized control trial so that we compare 900 children who've been getting the voucher to 900 children who haven't. And we're going to follow them through the 5 years to see what the effects of vouchers are. So, what does this mean for the UK? Has it got any lessons for the USA and for Europe? Well, first of all, it says that poor parents are capable of choosing. They can make a choice. They may be illiterate, but they can make a choice. And this is a fantastic thing. They can make a choice about their education for their children, and they want their children to be educated because they know it's a route out of poverty. It's also de facto privatisation. It hasn't needed a government, it hasn't needed an international aid agency to say, you need to privatise. People have done it themselves. It's people power. Parents have voted with their feet and sent their children to the schools they want to. Also, it's the accountability, isn't it? It's the accountability for those schools and those teachers that the parents pay a fee and those schools are accountable to them. So this is a heartwarming story which is affecting millions and millions of children around the world. It's giving them a route out of poverty. And this talk, thanks to Alex for all his help today, but also this talk is for all of those entrepreneurs working in difficult circumstances in developing countries around the world. And I'm just going to sing you something I said I was going to sing. I was just going to sing you something very short. It's in Urdu, and it's We Shall Overcome. And it goes, Hange kamya, hange kamya, hange kamya, Man may hai vishwa, pura hai vishwa, hange kamya ekadin. Thank you.